race fans, my name is Taylor and welcome to Above the Yellow Line, the show where we talk about all the updates, theories, news, recaps, and more of the NASCAR Cup Series. Today is a mix of an Updates and Hot Takes podcast and a pre-race show for the Toyota Owners 400 at Richmond Raceway. I cannot believe how much news there is to update you all on from this past week. It is insane. I'll divide this video up for you guys so you know what topics we're talking about when, and for the last half of the video, I'll do a pre-race talk on the Toyota Owners 400, discussing race facts and trying to reason out my race pick. This one is really tricky to figure out a race pick for, so I'll reason it out for myself, and maybe it'll help you with a fantasy lineup or just to figure out who to watch. Maybe I can go 2 for 2 this weekend. I got Martin Truex Jr. right for Martinsville, so maybe I'll reason my way into another win, but no more time to talk. Let's dive right into these updates. Beginning with updates from last weekend, we got to close out the Martinsville race, the Blue Emu Maximum Pain Relief 500, with violations and viewership. Starting with the violations, not a good thing to start with, but it's not as bad as it has been in the past. Only 3 Cup teams were fined for this weekend's race, besides Suarez, which we already talked about last podcast, who had a crew chief ejection for that race for an added ballast in an unapproved container. So we're going to leave him out of this discussion, but we have single lug nut violations for the 5 car of Larson, the 14 car of Briscoe, and the 47 car of Stenhouse Jr., $10,000 fines, but no crew chief ejections or nothing crazy going into this weekend, which is good, so nothing major there. I want to briefly go over Jeff Gluck's race poll here. 88.5% of fans said that this was a good race, which ties Vegas for the highest rated race this season so far, but only ranks 5 out of 11 on the all-time Martinsville poll list. Not that great if you look at it there. I did mention last podcast as well with this race that the perception seemed to be pretty high as I've seen this season, which I thought it was one of the best races this season. I personally have rated Homestead higher than those two, but we're moving in the right direction. We're getting higher ratings. Hopefully another short track race at Richmond this upcoming weekend will be good for the ratings as well. On the other hand, some positive news with viewership. In a tweet from Bob Pockrass, he mentioned the race at Martinsville brought in 2.299 million viewers. Last year's Wednesday race at Martinsville didn't bring nearly that amount of viewers for obvious reasons. You know, we had to race on Wednesday because of COVID, trying to get the races back into the NASCAR system. But if we compare this race to Sunday from 2019, it was down 7% from that one. But it was the most watched telecast on FS1 on Sunday, which is a added bonus, a plus. Only down 7%. I'm not too concerned about that as the ones I've been in the past. I think this weekend at Martinsville, everyone was super excited. It's short track racing, which kind of goes to prove, if you look at how the numbers have kind of declined with other races in this past year, Martinsville didn't decline as much as the other ones. You'll have to fact check me on that. I've looked, at least the ones I'm remembering I talked about did not decline as much. So NASCAR, short track racing, I think might be the way to go, adding some of those in the schedule. But those numbers from this weekend, they're just more numbers. We have more numbers flying around other than viewership and fines. Let's talk sponsorship with an update from the Marcus Lemonis situation with Josh Berry. Here's an update. Josh Berry was going to be in a Camping World car for the Talladega race. If he won, Lemonis was going to add 4 more races to the schedule, but there has been a change in the situation. Tire Pros has signed on to sponsor 2 more races with Josh Berry, starting with Talladega and then Dover. They've increased their sponsorship from 6 to 8 races, a very good sign after Josh Berry, of course, dominated and won the race at Martinsville, a short track racer having no issues in the Xfinity Series, winning a short track race. No surprises there. There was a lot of question, though, and I was confused as well, if this deal with Lemonis fell through. But Lemonis actually teamed up with Kelly Earnhardt and the whole team together to find a longer-term solution for them, so they weren't having to question sponsorship every single week up till the end of June, I think, when Berry steps out of the car and Sam Mayer steps in. With fans questioning this deal on social media, Marcus actually came back and tweeted, quote, "My offer was accepted and Kelly and I worked together to find the right long-term solution. They were successful in securing a longer program, which is my primary objective. My role in the sport is to show the value, help the teams grow, and give drivers a chance when I can." Berry must have really caught his eye because he's really focusing on his baby, the Truck Series. But he has been single-handedly saving the sport, and this is not to diminish other sponsors because they have kept the sport afloat, especially during COVID. Sponsorship can drop left and right, and we've seen it waver a little bit, but without them, we would not have a sport. That's basically what NASCAR is now. It's sponsorship, name on a car, you get the die-cast, you're like, that Tony Stewart Home Depot scheme looks really cool, let's buy that. I mean, that's what it's all about. I mean, besides racing, that's kind of what it's about. So sponsorship is crucial, especially this year, but no one has quite gone out of their way like Marcus Lemonis has, who is basically opening his wallet for these teams in the sport at the drop of a hat. I appreciate what he's done for this sport and what he is doing and continuing to do, and I know other fans appreciate that as well, as we saw the blue and yellow paint scheme, the sea of paint schemes in the Truck Series the past few weekends. We're very appreciative of everything he's doing for the sport, and hopefully he's encouraging other sponsors and other people with, I guess, deep pockets, for lack of a better word, to join in and help raise money for these teams. So Josh Berry is set for 2 more races this season, with Tire Pros adding additional sponsorship with his team at Junior Motorsports. More news with Junior Motorsports. Dale Jr. has mentioned that with this next-gen car this past weekend after Josh Berry won, he mentioned that there is a better possibility for bringing his Xfinity team to the Cup Series. A really big discussion here, guys, because I would like to see this team race in the Cup Series, even if it's just a one-car team to start off with. I think that'd be a really good opportunity. Junior said that the Cup Series was never really a thought until the next-gen car came out, which lowers prices for these teams, which kind of gets the gears turning in these team owners' heads. This tweet here quotes Dale Jr. saying, "We love where Junior Motorsports is at, but the new car forced us to sit down and have a conversation whether we're missing an opportunity to get into the Cup Series." You'll see that the top of this tweet mentions the charter system as a hurdle. We'll talk about that in a few minutes, as it also goes with another update I have right after this one. So we'll kind of break down the charter system and how that works and how that can pose as a little bit of a problem for teams trying to work their way into the Cup Series. But expanding on this conversation, in an article by Sportscasting, Junior talked about the possibility and talked about who he would want to fill that Cup car seat if they got one, and his answer with no question really was Josh Berry. But the challenge first with Josh Berry is getting him a full-time ride in the Xfinity Series, which I'm hoping we'll see in 2022 after his recent success. Like I mentioned, he is splitting the season with Sam Mayer, who will start with the team in June, I believe. Junior also talked about other challenges getting into the Cup Series. In this tweet by Kelly Crandall, Earnhardt says, quote, "Getting into that series is so hard. The money you're going to need and required there to be competitive more than doubles. We don't have a partner that's ready to make a commitment like that." So part of the struggle presented by many teams trying to get their way into the Cup Series is not just with the charter system. It's sponsorship, and it's clearly and obviously just more money. I mean, the charter system involves more money. But the next-gen car has also brought an enticing opportunity to all teams, not just top-tier teams, not just really high-figure people in the NASCAR world. Even teams like Rick Ware Racing apparently talked about this on a Sirius XM NASCAR radio. Here's a tweet here that kind of confirms this. They want to expand their operation because of the next-gen car and the affordability it provides. I would think that's the reason why. This is the team with Cody Ware and James Davis, and they want to make their team more competitive, expand it to 2 to 3 cars. So it's not just top-level teams we're talking about. We're talking about I don't want to say lower level teams, but we're talking about teams that usually will run in the top 30, top 20. And speaking of teams in the Cup Series trying to work their way into another ride with the charter system, one team already taking a look to expand, as we've talked about on the show in the past, is 2311 Racing. Their team is looking to expand their shop to make a multi-car team. I showed the team blueprints for their expansion in past episodes, so there's nothing new about this information other than the fact that Denny Hamlin and Michael Jordan are eyeing, we have a number now, a $9 to $16 million investment for a new 2311 headquarters already. They're looking for a new headquarters that would house 2 to 3 teams. With the next-gen car, again, adding cars with their low cost is much easier, so we're looking at an added expansion by 2022 for a lot of these teams, maybe granted that they can grab a charter. Now we're going to introduce this discussion, with the discussion starting to happen with the 2311 team. We're talking about Junior Motorsports wanting to move into the Cup Series. Let's explain this charter system in a little bit more detail so we can talk about this a little bit more on the show. So the charter system, it was introduced in February 2016 and it has an extension into 2024. What it is it provides stability and value to these cars and teams in the sport, as well as providing a business opportunity for these teams. The sport has 36 charter teams, and these charters guarantee these cars entries into point races. And the field usually has 40 cars. You'll see entries up to 39, 40 cars. So that means that the rest of the field has to race their way in to the races on weekends. And for instance, you saw, this was a more structured version of this, but the dual races going into the Daytona 500, we saw cars like Noah Gragson, we saw Austin Cindric, we saw Ty Dillon trying to race their way into the 500, the last 4 spots filling in the 40-car lineup. We talked about the value of guaranteeing these team spots in the races. Here's where the business opportunity comes in. These teams can sell their charters on the open market, and charter owners can transfer their charters to other teams for one full season once the first 5 years of the agreement are up. And we unfortunately see this a lot when teams are going bankrupt or running out of money. That's when these teams get desperate, or when they're out of the sport and they can't do the sport anymore, they're going to sell their charter to, I think 2311 Racing bought a charter. I'm blanking off the top of my head where they bought the charter from, but they took a charter from a team that is now out of the sport. And when we talk about these charters and the business opportunity, here's where NASCAR has a stake in the game. NASCAR has a right to take a charter away from a team if they do not perform up to NASCAR standards. This means that if a team finishes in the bottom 3 of the car owner standings among the other 36 charter teams for 3 years in a row, NASCAR can snatch those charters out of the team's hands, which keeps NASCAR more competitive, also gives NASCAR themselves a business opportunity to sell a charter to another team looking to invest in the Cup Series and looking to put their cars in the Cup Series. And also, a cap is placed on these teams so they can only run 4 cars in the series, so you don't have a powerhouse team like Hendrick Motorsports or Penske or even Joe Gibbs Racing trying to race 6 to 8 cars in the Cup Series every weekend. Gosh, I don't think any team has that amount of money to run that many cars, but it prevents that from happening. You also see teams kind of like Penske with Austin Cindric bringing in a 4th car if Penske only has 3 chartered cars in their system. So if you don't cap that off at 4 cars, you can bring a non-chartered car into the field on any given weekend if there is a spot to be filled in the field. Have another guy from maybe the Truck Series or the Cup Series in the car, allowing them to learn a little bit. So there's also a positive if you don't cap off your team at 4 cars. But all in all, that is a very large overview of the charter system, and why it's important to talk about in this podcast is because as we start to work our way towards the halfway point of the season, obviously we're a little ways off from that right now, but as we start to go to the halfway point and get silly season talks and contract talks and starting to talk about new teams and expansions, it's important to understand the charter system so you can be like, well, 2311 is trying to expand. They only got 1 more car when they wanted 2 more cars. Why is that? It's probably going to be a charter deal. If we also talk about, well, Dale Jr. is not able to get into the Cup Series, and obviously it is a brand new conversation, but if he's not able to get a charter, you can kind of understand a little bit why, as it is more of a business deal other than the sport just straight up telling him no, there's no spots available. So there's half the updates right there. Let's dive into the last part of this, starting with some disappointing news regarding the Nashville Fairgrounds Speedway with the Cup cars. There was a meeting held a few nights ago with the Board of Fair Commissioners at the Metropolitan Government of Nashville and Davidson County of Tennessee. They held a whole meeting about the NASCAR Fairgrounds to start racing there again. And after these talks, things are kind of weary. Things are kind of iffy right now because this is facing a lot of backlash from community members, though sponsors, race fans, NASCAR community, everyone's super excited about this. The community itself, where the Nashville Fairgrounds is placed, people aren't that pleased. So it looks like this is not going to happen in 2022, as there is still a lot to figure out. There's still a lot to get that track up and running. But Bristol's general manager, who's trying to help make this happen, Jerry Caldwell, has a statement here that I'm going to put on the screen. I'm going to read over it just a little bit, saying, "We are very pleased with the continued progress we are making with all Metro stakeholders surrounding the rescue efforts of this historic Nashville Fairgrounds Speedway. It is our desire to synchronize with the other construction schedules to maximize those activities while limiting disruptions to the community. We will look forward to hosting racing events as soon as possible and welcoming fans to a revitalized Nashville Fairgrounds Speedway." There is the quote there. After reading that quote, it looks like things are moving in the right direction, though they are trying to minimize the effects it has on the surrounding community. I think a big thing is just going to be noise complaints, honestly. I mean, I live pretty close to another racetrack, and I can hear it just sitting on the back porch in my backyard. I can hear the cars go by, and to me, it's soothing. I like it. It's not too loud. It's not too crazy. I mean, it's away from a lot of other houses. There's a few near there, of course, but I don't see it as big of an issue. But if you're there living in a house near the speedway, you didn't think that the speedway was going to be revitalized, so I can see how this could be an issue with the community members. As always, Twitter has things to say about this. Obviously, NASCAR fans are not too pleased with the backlash this has presented. Xfinity Series driver Ryan Vargas tweeted, "If the track was there before you moved in next door, that's on you. What a horrible excuse. It is something that will never cease to baffle me. You moved next door to a racetrack. Stop whining, this is on you." There's more of his tweet up here. Yes, I can agree with it, but I don't think any of these people also realized this track was going to be revitalized. But you see a racetrack, you're like, I mean, that's kind of a cool historical place. You didn't realize it was going to be picked back up and there was going to be races there. So the issue is these people cannot just move from their houses. They can't put their house on the market like that, move away because there's going to be a racetrack built. That's a disturbance to the people in the community. But you can not build the racetrack. So that's where we're seeing some backlash from the community. There was a lot of people calling in, very upset, very angry. Someone called mentioning that there was a school a quarter of a mile away from the racetrack, and that's an excuse to me. That just doesn't make sense. You're not going to have NASCAR races. They're not going to be racing there 365 days a year. You know, it'll be 1 or 2 weekends out of the year. that's also something for community members to consider. So I think there's also an issue between communication and what the community members know about NASCAR. They're kind of looking at it in terms of, well, this is going to be a disturbance all the time, but you have to remember that races don't happen every single day of the year. But I guess my point in bringing this up is there is controversy on both sides, but also that we are seeing progress in making the Nashville Fairgrounds Speedway an actual thing. I think it is going to be an exciting and very cool historical track to bring back into the circuit at some point. Obviously not next year. I'm thinking this will probably take like maybe 3, 4, or 5 years to do, especially if they need to reconstruct a bit. Maybe it'll take longer, but I'm hoping that the community members can kind of get on board with this, but also I do understand it can bring noise. But even if I'm at Kentucky Speedway for a race weekend and I'm sitting in my trailer, it's not that loud, actually, and I'm pretty close to the track. It's not super loud, so I don't know, guys. It's gonna be interesting. I'll update you on some more news as it comes, but I think this is gonna be an ongoing discussion in the next few years. Probably not news like next week, but I'll update you all as more news comes with this development. We have 3 more pieces of news to get through here. A new policy being introduced on a positive note after we talked about some controversy with the new track coming in. About Darlington, they'll be opening its garage area to a limited number of VIP guests, according to Adam Stern's tweet. This tweet says that these spots will be open to 1 sponsor and 1 guest per team, and these guests must be fully vaccinated. A good thing. Reopening is good. I think they still have to adhere to, of course, COVID guidelines and keep their masks on, but this will lead to more openings and hopefully getting more media and fans back in the garage area if this is done correctly and if this is done safely. The garage area and Hot Pass experience was the best thing ever for me, at least. I was able to get one from the Xfinity Series Racing. I tweeted a lot, and then they sent me a thing my way. They were like, hey, do you want Hot Passes? And of course I said yes, and it was the best experience of my life. Probably, if I'm talking about it right now, it was the most fun I have ever had. And this is an opportunity I hope will open up soon, and I hope more fans are able to have this experience once things open back up. And also, if they do open back up to fans, it might take a little bit. I don't know if things are going to fully open up to fans this year, as we're still trying to figure out vaccination and everything. And, you know, how do you technically prove you got fully vaccinated once you go back to the track? It's going to be a big blunder of complications and trying to figure things out. But I do hope that fans are able to get this opportunity again, and I also hope that it's not compromised. Like, I'm still wanting fans to be able to interact with the drivers as they walk around the garage areas. I really want that openness to still be there, but as you know, with COVID, it's kind of diminishing how things are running, and it's for safety concerns. But as I keep saying, I hope the experience still stands, and I hope that fans are still able to get back to do that. This also brings in revenue for teams and to NASCAR as a whole as we put these pit passes back into play. They cost a little extra, so fans are paying a little extra going back to the sport. And a big selling point for these sponsors, Joey Logano mentioned in one of the interviews I think he did with Bob Podcast, is that a lot of the sponsors pay to have their name on a car also so they can get the kind of VIP experience. They can go back behind the scenes, meet the drivers, see the cars up close. That's a big selling point for these sponsors. And that opportunity to go behind the scenes brings in a lot of important people, and it keeps these investors really excited to see their names on the cars and really excited to continue being with the sport as opposed to just watching it on their TV, because that's the experience is just not the same. It is just not. Being there in person is so much more eye-opening, so much more exciting to me with all the sounds, the sights, the smells. It is just something different that these sponsors are going to have to get back into, and I think it could bring in more revenue to the sport as well. So it is a very good thing to have people coming back, not just for the fan experience, but for getting more revenue into the sport. Speaking of having more people in the sport, this kind of goes along with that. Another new implementation on NASCAR's part to support diversity as well in the sport. NASCAR has teamed up with the Institute for Sport and Social Justice, RISE, the Trevor Project, Unidos US, Urban Youth Racing School, and the Women's Sports Foundation to promote diversity within the sport and to help expand their efforts to create positive change in communities. NASCAR is also creating a new employee resource for the LGBTQ+ employees, adding to their women's, Black, and Hispanic resource groups that they already have in place. I'm hoping to see these organizations on the cars also in the future. Hopefully they can team up their kind of sponsorship deals if possible. And I'm also excited to see and hear what kind of changes that NASCAR can promote in communities with these new team-ups. Finally, to end the update segment of this podcast, new and exciting update. This is probably the one I'm the most excited about. And it has to do not with NASCAR, but the Superstar Experience Racing Series that is now, I'm going to say officially, is a rival to NASCAR. They announced their broadcast lineup, and it is so darn good, you guys. The series will be airing on CBS Television Network and will be on Paramount Plus starting Saturday, June 12th with 6 consecutive race weekends. Here is your list of distinguished panelists we have in the booth. Lindsay Czarniak as the host, Brad Doherty, we have Matt Yocum, and Alan Bestwick, folks. He is back in the booth. I am so excited to have him back as a play-by-play commentator for the SXR series. We also have our driver analysts we have to talk about. We have James Hinchcliffe, we have Dario Franchitti, and Danica Patrick. They have pulled together the big guns here. No joke, they have an excellent team. Evernham and Stewart pulled together an amazing group of panelists to bring a lot of attention to the SXR racing experience. No doubt everyone is talking about this. I also want to quickly mention the amount of experience I think everyone involved in this has. We have, of course, Tony Stewart, Evernham, who have racing experience. I want to talk about specifically the driver analyst and what they bring to the table. Danica Patrick has done lots of racing series. She's well known for the NASCAR series. We have James Hinchcliffe, who has done Grand Prix experience and also IndyCar. We have Dario Franchitti, who is known for IndyCar but has actually been in a NASCAR. So a very informed panelist, and I'm curious to hear specifically if they can commentate on this or not, how differently the SXR cars run from a NASCAR stock car on a weekly basis. I want to know what's different about them, what makes them better, what makes them worse from the panelists themselves, and also I want to hear this from the drivers if they can get that out of the drivers, not to bash NASCAR, but I actually want to know what makes these cars better or what makes them a little bit worse. I'm very excited to see this series start racing. I'm going to hopefully be going to a race when they go to Eldora. I'm keeping my fingers crossed when tickets go on sale that I'll be able to go there and actually experience it and then get a podcast out to you guys about that, but that's for the future. And speaking of the future, we're done with updates. Let's talk about this future race at Richmond Raceway, the Toyota Owners 400. As always, let's start by discussing the race and track information for this weekend. The track is 0.75 miles around, and this race will be 300 miles or 400 laps long. Stage 1 should last 80 laps, Stage 2 is 155 laps long, and the final stage is 165 laps long with a competition caution somewhere in the first stage. Before we go to the Cup Series lineup, I want to quickly mention someone that will be in the truck field this weekend that I am extremely excited about. We're going to be seeing Ryan Reed in a truck car the first time since 2019. Ryan Reed used to be my favorite driver when I started watching this sport, and when he left, I was super sad. I used to love watching him in the Truck Series and the Xfinity Series, and he'll be back this weekend piloting the 49 car for CMI Motorsports. This is very exciting news thrown into the mix. With that said, let's line up the Cup Series right now, lining up the field. Last weekend's race winner, Martin Truex Jr., is on the pole this weekend next to teammate and points leader Denny Hamlin. The rest of the top 10 are as follows. We have Elliott, Byron, Logano, Larson, Blaney, Bell, Harvick, and Kyle Busch rounding out the top 10 there. I have to show one paint scheme for this weekend. I'm only limiting myself to one, with Kevin Harvick's Hunt Brothers unique paint scheme, their pizza paint scheme, with a QR code on the hood of this car. Take a look at this. All teams should really just do this. It's so hip and happening. I'm just going to say, lack of a better word, and I feel super old saying that, but it's true. It's going to get fans involved in the sport, watching on their TV, getting their phones out, and it's a contest that Hunt Brothers Pizza is doing. It's so much fun, and it's so creative. Kudos to whoever came up with this idea. Like I said, other teams should really take notice of this with that creative scheme. I also think that Kevin Harvick just has some of the best paint schemes in NASCAR week in, week out with Busch, and they have Jimmy John's, and all his sponsors just have the coolest ideas for paint schemes. So kudos to that whole team and all those sponsors as a whole, really ringing in the paint scheme prize this weekend. Outside of the top 10, there are a few drivers I want to note here. We got to mention Austin Cindric starting in the back of the field, piloting the 33 for Team Penske this weekend. Again, going to be back in the car. We also got to mention Brad Keselowski, a Penske driver who won last year at Richmond, starting way back in 20th after a rough weekend at Martinsville, a track that he's generally very good at. He has been very off the past few weeks. I'm a little concerned about the Brad Keselowski team. Hopefully he can turn it around here at Richmond. Three other drivers I want to mention here is Alex Bowman, who's going to be starting back in 24th after a rough few weeks. Suarez, who's actually had a good past few weeks, starting 11th last weekend in the race, going back in 27th for Richmond this weekend after getting caught in a fiery wreck. Keselowski and Bowman were actually caught in that wreck too, so that affected their starting positions. I think the equation that NASCAR uses to set up the field without qualifying or practices is good, but it also really penalizes drivers who really just had one rough race and putting them back in the pack. I'm not a big fan of that, and especially with Suarez, who I think, based on his performances the past few weeks, deserves a better starting position, but not my place to say. We're just going to move on. Finally, I want to mention Corey LaJoie with an amazing race last weekend, the best, I think, in his career so far, and I could be mistaken, correct me if I'm wrong, but best in his career so far, got caught up in that wreck, also starting in the last of the chartered car teams in 36th. That is your starting lineup, and now that we have our lineup, let's line up the odds and go over some track and driver history here. The last driver to win at this track was Brad Keselowski, as I mentioned, back in September of 2020. The active driver with the most wins here is Kyle Busch with 6, and the only other driver that comes even close to that in the active driver category is Denny Hamlin and Kevin Harvick with 3. Impressive of Kyle Busch there. The active driver with the best average finish at this track, also no surprise, Kyle Busch with a 6.77 average finishing position. The team with the most wins here is Joe Gibbs Racing with 16 wins, and finally the manufacturer with the most wins is Chevrolet with what I counted 37 wins. Even though Chevy has the most wins at this track and Ford is close following with 31 from what I counted, Toyota has won 7 out of the last 10 races here. And if we're talking more numbers, we have to talk about starting positions, because starting positions have a key factor in who wins here at Richmond from what I'm seeing at least. If we look at the top starting position, 18.75% of drivers have won from the top spot. That's about 24 drivers. That's a pretty high number, though. If you look at the active drivers winning from the top spot since 2010, only 3 drivers have been able to do that. So we're going to expand this here and look at the top 5 starting positions, which has a 57% chance of winning from those spots. So when we look at race winners here and we try to reason out who I think is going to win, we have to look at those top 5 starting positions, and knowing that the Toyotas have done well here and are starting at the front row, I think I'm looking at a Joe Gibbs Racing guy to win this race. Now, I could choose someone from the Ford camp. I would probably choose Logano because he showed that he can win races this season. Heck, he has won one. I could choose Harvick, who's had a really big success at this track, but we also have to look at he has not had a race-winning car remotely at all this season. I could choose a Chevy driver, but the driver in the Chevy camp that has had the best average finish here has only raced here once, and that's Tyler Reddick. Behind him is Elliott and Larson, but we're going to focus on the Toyotas this weekend, and I got to look at these 3 guys. I got to look at Martin Truex Jr., Denny Hamlin, and Kyle Busch. And this is tricky. Martin Truex Jr. has shown speed and has won twice, but he's not the best at this track. He actually has the worst average finish on his team. Then you look at Kyle Busch with the best average finish in the field and the best finish on his team averages, but he hasn't won a race this year, or he actually really has not had a race-winning car. Then you have Denny Hamlin, who shows he can win races. He has race-winning cars, race-winning speed, with the second best average finish at this track in the whole field, but he can never close out races. We also have to mention the new kid on the block in the team, Christopher Bell, with 1 race win this season, but an average finishing position of 15 at this track. That is actually better than Martin Truex Jr.'s finish at this track, but he also hasn't really had a race-winning car in the past few weeks. Long story short, or I guess long story long, depending on how you look at this weekend, I honestly have no clue who's going to win this race. And it's not because the same reason I didn't know who was going to win the race at the beginning of the season, with the whole field topsy-turvy, everyone's outperforming what I thought they were going to do. It's because the stats are not lining up with the drivers' performances in the past. And we've seen Kevin Harvick and Kyle Busch dominate at this track or do very well at this track, but also they haven't been race-winning drivers this season, which makes it very confusing. So this weekend I'm calling this kind of my long shot win here, and not for the fact that I don't think this driver is not going to win a race this season. I think they're definitely going to win a race this season. It's a matter of, can they actually put a full, complete race together? After what I saw last weekend at Martinsville, Denny Hamlin had a race-winning car on a short track. He just was not able to complete the job. But if he has a good car on a short track, like we saw him have last weekend, and if he can complete a race, I can only imagine what a dominating run he can have at Richmond Raceway. So I'm not completely confident on this, but I do think Denny Hamlin could have a very good shot at being your winner of the Toyota Owners 400 this weekend at Richmond Raceway. It would be a good win for a Toyota. They're sponsoring the race. So let's see if we can get a Toyota in victory lane. And with that prediction, that is all I have for you all today. Let me know in the comments below who you think is going to win this race, because I'm lost here. Maybe you'll be the race-winning pick this weekend. Who knows? But I want to thank you all so much for tuning into this longer episode of Above the Yellow Line, a show where we talk about all the updates, theories, news, recaps, and more of the NASCAR Cup Series. Check out the links below for more NASCAR content from me from my Twitter account, where I give lap-by-lap coverage of races on race weekends and post daily news and updates there. Also check out the Podium Finish for great content about all things racing. I wrote a recap for Martinsville last weekend, so check that out if you can. Next time you'll hear me, it'll be for a race recap of the Toyota Owners 400 that is happening happening this Sunday, April 17th at 3 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Fox. And if you can't watch the race, follow my Twitter commentary or listen to the MRN radio on the NASCAR app to follow along. It's totally free. If you're afraid you're going to miss the race and you can't watch it, listen to it. Keep following along with this channel by hitting the bell icon and subscription button and catch my latest projects. Thank you all again so much for supporting this channel, and until next time, I'll see ya.